What I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you a presentation on two topics. One of them is going to be frontal lobe function, and the other is going to be language as related to brain damage. And I've got lots of videos to show you to help illustrate the points. So the first presentation is on frontal function, and I have no disclosures. And our objectives are for me to help you learn how to assess frontal function, and we're going to focus on areas including attention, set shifting, abstraction, theory of mind, self-awareness, social behavior, and executive function. And what I'm going to do is I'll go through each of these and I'll show you some videos to help illustrate the points. So as I said, for the frontal functions, we're going to go through this list. So let's start to do that. So one of the functions that's important to assess is attention. And attention really refers to the ability to focus on what you're doing, okay? And you can tell if people are focusing in many different ways. One is behavior, just look at the person and see if they're paying attention and attending to what you're saying. But there are specific tests that can measure this. And two tests that are commonly used at the bedside are serial subtractions and months of the year backwards. And there are many more. And serial subtractions, what that refers to is you ask a person to start at the number 100, and you say, I want you to take away 7. 7 is very common. And keep taking away 7s. So to do that, that is only a measure of attention, by the way, if a person is able to do the arithmetic. But to do that, you have to keep in mind what the task is. You have to subtract 7 from 100, which is 93. You have to focus. Remember that you're on 93. Go back and subtract the 7s. You've got a new number. Go back and subtract the 7s. So that requires attention. It requires other functions as well, but attention is one of them, okay? And serial 3s is another test that does the same kind of thing. It's just an easier one that you're subtracting 3s. And reciting months of the year backwards, you're taking a test, you're taking a task that people can do normally, like recite them forward, but to recite them backwards, you have to do some real focusing. So these are common standard bedside tests of attention. So I want to show you an example. Can you start at the number 100, take away 7, and keep taking away 7s?
100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 60, 60, I guess, 7, 9, 7, 79. This used to be my strength, now it's my weakness.
So that's a soft video. I hope you heard it. He was doing okay until he got to around to 60. And then he had great difficulty, and he said, this used to be my strength. So he had difficulty with that task. Another standard frontal test is verbal fluency. And that's where you have to give as many words that a person can, you say, give me as many words as you can think of that begin with a certain letter, or as many animals as you can think of. And that test, again, these tests require many different kinds of functions, but one of them is frontal function. So you have to use your frontal lobes to be able to generate these animal names. And a person with a high school education, for example, should be able to generate 10 or 11 words beginning with the letter F, or about 18 animal names. So I'm going to give you another video example of the same patient. Can you give me as many different animals as you can think of in a minute? Go.
Dog, cat, cow.
And that's all he got. I didn't run it for the full minute. And this is a highly educated man. A high school education you should be able to give about 18 of them. Okay? So the test is called wordless generation or verbal fluency. And these are standard tasks for frontal function. Now, set shifting is another frontal function. And what set shifting means is when you're doing a task and that task is finished, you have to shift and do something else. And people who've got frontal problems, what they have difficulty doing is shifting from one task to another. So they keep doing the same kind of thing. And a test at the bedside that looks at this, one of the standard tests, is called multiple loops. And here you can see you give the person a piece of paper with 3 of these. So there are three of items with 3 loops. So there's a lot of threeness in there. And you ask them to copy these and continue to go right to the end of the page. But what you can see is that the person, what happened is they start, this mouse doesn't work too well, they start and they drew an extra loop. So you're supposed to stop after you do 3 of them and then do another one. But what happens is they draw an extra loop and they keep drawing extra loops and they keep making more and more and more. So this person is having trouble stopping drawing the loops. So they're having trouble shifting the set that they're in. And that's a standard frontal function. Now, clock drawing, abstraction. Clock drawing measures many things as well. But one of the things that it measures is the ability to abstract. And people with frontal functions often have difficulty with that. And let me show you an example of a clock where abstraction is important. Whether you see something on clock drawing often depends on what time you ask the person to set the clock. Now, 10 after 11 is one of the sensitive times, because what you have to do for 10 after 11 is one hand goes on the 11, the other one for 10 after, it's not really a 10, as you know, it's a 2. So the person has to abstract the concept of the 10 and represent it as a 2 for 10 after. So people with frontal dysfunction, when they hear the 10 after the 11, and the 10 is sitting there right beside the 11, they tend to draw the minute hand at the 10 and draw 10 to 11. Now that sounds good. Question is it true? So if it's true, I should be able to show you different time settings where you don't see this. So here is this is a patient in my office, and I had the patient draw 3 time settings, one right after the other. So for 10 after 11, they did exactly what I described. Now for 20 after 8, there's no 20 on the clock. And this person actually got it correct. So that's not as good a time. And 3 o'clock, where there's nothing that the person has to recode, it's the best clock of all. So you see the differences. Had you asked the person to draw 3 o'clock, you would have gotten a good response. You asked them to draw 10 after 11, you get a poor response. Now this is in the fairly early stages. As people become more severely impaired, they do a different thing. So for 10 after 11, they will literally draw a little 10 after the 11. Okay? Now, once somebody's at this stage, it doesn't matter what the other numbers are, because for 20 after 8, they'll draw a little 20 right after the 8. So that's very literal, no abstraction. All right, so you saw the pre-week video, right? You did or didn't? You did, okay. So we got a question here. What executive functions include? And there are 5 options here. And what I'd like you to do is, if you think it's A, raise your hand. Task setting, monitoring, and energization. Who thinks executive function is that? Actually, let me do it differently. Stand up. Everybody stand up. Stand up. Let's do this differently. This is going to be an active way of doing it rather than a passive. If you think it's A, sit down. Okay. If you think it's, all right, 2 people. If you think it's B, sit down. If you think it's C, sit down. Is Mississauga standing up too? Everybody's got to stand up. Can Mississauga stand up? You guys stay standing. Mississauga, if you think it's A, sit down. If you think it's B, sit down. Okay, so we're all up to, if you think it's C, sit down. If you think it's D, sit down. If you think it's E, sit down. Okay, that's sort of an active way. You have to participate when you do it like that. Okay, the answer is task setting and monitoring. Okay, now, okay. There it is. Okay, so executive functions that's a term that people tend to misunderstand. A lot of people equate executive functions with frontal functions. And that's sort of okay to do, but they're actually not the same. Because the frontal systems are an anatomical localization in the brain. Executive function, they're processes, okay? And they're processes that consist of task setting and monitoring, okay? Now, task setting refers to putting in place a plan in response to a stimulus or a demand. So, for example, learning how to drive a car or to plan a wedding. You've got to organize it. You've got to plan it, okay? So one thing you can do is you can ask the patient how they would plan an event. But also, in any task, there is executive functions. So when I ask someone to draw a clock and put in all the numbers and set the hands at 10 after 11, to organize that, to get the numbers organized, to get the hands organized, and to figure out where to put them, there's an overarching executive function process, because you got to plan it. Now, that function, the executive function component, is related to left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So lesions in there create problems with task setting. Monitoring, that's where you're checking what you're doing over time. You're adjusting your behavior if you're wrong. You basically got to complete a task successfully. You've got your plan, but you've got to do things, and if things aren't working out right, you've got to modify. You've got to be aware of what's happening. Now, a bedside test for that is you can ask a person to tap with a consistent beat, 2 per second for 30 seconds. So you've got to be consistent. You've got to start at the right time. You've got to stop at the right time. So you've got to monitor what you're doing in relation to the instructions. And a test like clock drawing, where does monitoring come in? So let's say you have to put in all the numbers. So you put in let's say you put in a 1 and you put in a 2, and then you get a little distracted and you put in another 2. Well, you're not monitoring that there's already a 2 there. Okay? So that's an example of monitoring in another kind of test. So executive functions really are involved in much of what you do. And that's related to the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Energization is a process where you have to initiate a response. You have to start something, and you have to keep doing it until it's time to finish it. And that's related to bilateral superior medial lesions, and there's some evidence for a more important role of the right superior medial area. Okay, let's shift to theory of mind. Theory of mind, it's not a theory of the mind. What it is, it's an awareness of other people's perspective. And it's also an awareness, technically, of your own mental state. But when many people talk about theory of mind, they're not actually referring to awareness of your own state, which is self-awareness. They're really talking, in many experiments and many studies, they're really focusing on the perspective of another person. But technically, both are part of theory of mind. Now, that's not something we do at the bedside, but it is a frontal function. Let me tell you a classical way of testing this. It's involved using the false belief task, okay? And here's the example. You have two people in a room, okay? And one person takes this folder and puts it in a drawer. And the other person sees that, all right? And then the person who put it away goes out, all right, waving goodbye. When the person's gone, the person who's still there takes the folder and puts it somewhere else. But the other person doesn't see that, okay? And then the person comes back. So the question is, where does this person think that this folder is? Now, to answer that question, you know where the folder is. But to answer the question, you've got to take the perspective of this person, because this person last saw the folder going in here. So they got a false belief, okay? But that's where they think it is. So the question to you, the false belief question to the patient, is where does this person think that the folder is? And that's theory of mind. Because you've got to take the perspective of the other person, not simply say where the folder is. Okay? Now, I want to give you an example of a dementia. It's a classical dementia affecting the frontal lobes. It's called frontal temporal dementia. And I'm going to be talking here about what's called the behavioral variant of frontal temporal dementia. Frontal temporal dementia is a broad term, and it can affect speech, it can affect behavior. What I'm talking about is the behavioral variant of frontal temporal dementia. And these people they get very disinhibited, they may be apathetic, no motivation, they may not appreciate other people's emotions or feelings, so they can't be sympathetic or empathetic. They may have repetitive compulsive behaviors. They may have dietary changes where they eat too much or have a food preference. And neuropsychologically, if they have anything, they'll have frontal system dysfunction. Memory is relatively good, and visuospatial function is very good. I want to show you a video of a person with this, and it's a school teacher. And what she did is she wrote the letter L on a student's forehead for loser. And she obviously got into trouble for that. So you're going to hear me talking to the daughter about this and to her. And she'll be explaining what she did as well. What you'll know, people with this disorder tend not to be aware that there's a problem. So I'll be talking to the daughter, and the patient isn't going to be really fazed by this at all. So it's a 55-year-old woman with behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia, recent change in behavior. Has there been any changes in your behavior?
You know what, I really don't think so.
I'm going to ask your daughter, have you noticed any changes?
I would say definitely.
Can you give me some examples?
A specific example, she had a dinner
Studio's
party
having
and
trouble.
had, a bunch of people over, invited everyone over, sat down, served everyone their food, raced through her own meal, and, everyone's sitting there prepared for, a night of 2 or 3 hours of, eating and, drinking and conversing, and all of a sudden she's gone through a meal and she's picking up everyone's plates, and no one had finished their meal. No one had even, really started their meal. She had decided the night was over and it was time for them to go home. Then at school, some really, really strange behavior at her school was I got a call from one of the teachers, and apparently she had written
I don't know what's...
on a kid's forehead with a magic marker, and she had written a big L on the kid's forehead for loser.
Tell me exactly what happened with the letter L.
Well, as I say, he was just, he's a good kid.
I want you to see what she does
Being a little
with the
bit
letter L.
silly. And so I put the L on his forehead.
These videos
Why
were
did you go
apparently
to that
tested,
particular
so
student?
I don't know
Because
what's...
he was just being silly.
What do you mean?
He was just sort of standing up and doing a little
Okay, this is not...
dance and
All right, what she does is at the end, I ask her, what she did, and then she said, well, I went over to the student,
That's when I
and
went
then I
over
just
and
put the
put it
L on his forehead. And she draws an L in the air. Okay? So I apologize. That's one of the best videos that I wanted to show you. But it's not working. Okay, so there's another video I want to show you, and this relates to self-awareness, okay? Awareness of one's own limitations. And this patient also has frontotemporal dementia, and you're going to hear me talking to her about her deficits. She's going to think that she knows she has frontotemporal dementia, and she's going to think that she's fine. But she shows an interesting phenomenon. When I put her in a situation where she's supposed to make a judgment about somebody else with frontotemporal dementia, she'll think the person is not fine and they can't work. But she thinks that she can work. So she's not aware of herself as having a problem with all the information that she needs to make the decision that she's got a problem. So here's this video.
Do you feel that you have any problems? Do you feel that you're any different than anybody else in terms of your memory or your thinking ability?
No.
Have other people told you that you do have a problem?
No.
Has anybody told you that you have frontotemporal dementia?
Well, yes, you did.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that you can work and do everything that you used to do?
Yes.
So, are you working now?
No.
Why are you not working?
Well, so many companies are saying that I'm overqualified, even though I'm certainly willing to settle for a lower level position and a lower salary.
You've had interviews for jobs?
Mm-hmm.
And what do they tell you?
That I'm overqualified.
I'd like to do something that we did a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to do something that we did before.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to imagine that you're an employer of a large company,
Mm-hmm.
and you're interviewing people for a job.
Mm-hmm.
Someone comes to you asking for a job.
Mm-hmm.
Their doctor feels that they have frontotemporal dementia.
Mm-hmm.
They feel that they're perfectly okay. Would you hire that person?
Would their doctor tell me that they have frontal lobe dementia?
Let's say you had permission to talk to their doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and the doctor told you that they do have frontotemporal dementia.
Mm-hmm.
Would you hire that person?
No, in all honesty, I wouldn't.
Why not?
Because certainly with that problem, they could forget things and so on.
Okay, let's now pretend that you're no longer the person who's hiring people.
Mm-hmm.
You're back to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you that you have frontotemporal dementia.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that you're capable of working?
Well, yes, I am.
So she can work with frontotemporal dementia, but the other person can't. So she's not aware of her own problems. With all the information, she knows that frontotemporal dementia can cause a problem. Okay, so what we did is we covered a series of frontal functions. We talked about attention, verbal fluency, set shifting, abstraction, executive function, energization, theory of mind, and social behavior in relation to the frontotemporal dementia. Okay, so by now you should have hopefully met the objectives that we set out at the beginning. So what I want to do in the last 15 minutes or so is switch to aphasia. Aphasia is the term given to a breakdown of language following brain damage. Again, I have no disclosures. The objectives here are for me to describe to you the clinical features of the different types of aphasia and the underlying anatomy. And I've got lots of videos. The only way to really learn about aphasia is to hear it and to see the patients. Reading about it is good, but until you actually see the patients, it doesn't click. Okay? So here's a question. Everybody stand up. Please stand up. Mississauga, stand up. Okay. If you think literal paraphasias are word substitutions, sit down. If you think they're different from phonemic paraphasias, sit down. If you think they're sound substitutions, sit down. Okay, everybody who's standing is wrong. Sound substitutions. Okay. Okay. Aphasias can be broken down into different categories. One way of doing it is looking at aphasias that are fluent and aphasias that are non-fluent. What is a fluent aphasia? A fluent aphasia is an aphasia where somebody speaks at a normal or increased rate. A non-fluent aphasia is when they're speaking at a reduced rate. Okay, it's as simple as that. All right, and there are 4 fluent aphasias that I'm going to show you: conduction aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia. We'll talk about transcortical sensory aphasia and anomic aphasia. The non-fluent aphasias are Broca's, global, transcortical motor, and mixed transcortical. So I want to show you a video of conduction aphasia. Now, you're going to hear the patient speak fluently. This aphasia has good comprehension. Patients repeat poorly, and they name poorly. And a lesion here is either in the arcuate fasciculus or its connections. Now, this patient is not 100% typical because most people with conduction aphasia don't speak as quickly as she does. They tend to monitor themselves and they're more hesitant. So, but the reality is that many aphasias are not 100% textbook. But this patient, you got to listen carefully because it goes by quickly. She's going to have paraphasias. So she's going to say day goods. Paraphasias are either word substitutions or sound substitutions. And literal paraphasias are sound substitutions. Semantic paraphasias or verbal paraphasias, same thing, are word substitutions. So she's going to say day goods for dishes, fall off the stalks for fall off the stool, walch for watch, and shawl for sole of the shoe. She's going to say a lot of other things as well. But you got to listen carefully.
There's children, there's 2 legs in a box. They're going up to the cover, and the box got his stops, his brokens. And his mother was doing her Davids. And she's got with water, and the water's going dry. So it's a boy and a girl, and there's a mother. Mm-hmm. And there's lots, she's got dots, and she's wiped her top, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm. And is she aware of what's going on?
Well, she's watching, but he's going to fall off the stalks. He's going to fall in there.
Mm-hmm. At first, what's the name of this?
The pencil.
Pencil. Do you know the name of this part here?
Yes, it's an end. Tantic, you put on the end.
And what is this? What are these?
Kings for your house or your office.
And this here?
Your watch.
And what is the name of this part here?
Walter.
And what I'm wearing here? What,
Shoes.
this part here.
Layers.
And this part here.
That's off spot. Shawl.
Just repeat the sentence. The spy led to Arden.
The prank's effort to his Blake.
Just repeat the sentence. He's the one who did it.
East and west.
Just repeat what I'm saying. He's the one who did it.
He is the one who did it.
No ifs, ands, or buts.
There are no bets and bets it.
Okay, so you heard she had tremendous problem with repetition. She had problems naming. She was able to understand quite well, and she was fluent. So that's a conduction aphasia. Now, Wernicke's aphasia, these patients are fluent, but they don't understand well. And they also don't repeat well, and they don't name well. So the difference between them and the conduction aphasias is these people have poor comprehension. And the lesion is in the posterior superior temporal lobe, in the first temporal gyrus. Now, these patients will show an interesting phenomenon, and that is even though they may understand very little in terms of point to the door, point to the ceiling, point to the floor, for single things, when it comes to midline commands like stand up, take off your glasses, open your mouth, they do much better. Okay? And it's a curious phenomenon. So here's the video. It's an old video, so it's a bit degraded, but it shows you great, great things.
What was it that brought you to the hospital?
Just a couple of days, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What happened to you?
I don't know.
Are you okay now?
Good, I feel leaky. That's all, just a little bit, that's all. I've been for a long time there, for like doing, you see.
You retired?
Oh, yeah, right, sure.
What work did you used to do?
Oh, I was like, well, I can't think it. I know what I do the job, I just do it.
I'm to ask you to do some things for me.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, sure.
I'd like you to point to the floor.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Point to the ceiling.
Oh, yeah, sure. I know what it is, sure.
Point to the door.
Go, sure, I know what it is, sure.
Point to the chair.
Yes, I know what it is, sure.
Take off your glasses.
Sure.
Now you see it.
Okay, put them back on.
Sure, just a minute. Sure, go ahead, sure. Yes.
Wait, sit down. Stand up, go to the door,
Yeah.
turn around, and come back.
Just go up and see that?
Stand up, go to the door,
Yeah.
turn around, and come back.
See, you couldn't even point to the door or the ceiling.
Thank you.
And sit down.
Thank you.
All right? Your mouth.
Midline.
Stick out your tongue. Okay. Good. I'd like you to stand up, turn around twice. Good. Now, I'd like you to go to the door, turn around, and come back.
Okay, can we go back to the presentation now? Okay.
What was it that brought you to the hospital?
All right, let's shift to Broca's aphasia. This is a non-fluent aphasia. People speak at a reduced rate. They understand well. They do not repeat well, and they do not name well. And the lesion is in the posterior inferior frontal lobe. So here's the video.
Took a jar,
Yeah.
Girl is standing there.
Mm-hmm.
Drip, drip, drip.
Yeah.
Washing dishes.
Yeah.
Stool,
Mm-hmm.
crumbling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
No.
Pretty
No.
much. What about this one? What's she doing?
What?
Yeah. You told me about her?
Yes, but cookies.
Okay, what this is, there are some aphasics who do better when they sing. And that's actually the basis of a therapy called melodic intonation therapy. And this is a Broca's aphasia, and you're going to see how he does better in getting the words out when he sings than when he talks. Okay, we can run it now.
Did you do anything new?
No, this.
Your arm practice?
Yes, please.
Okay. Did she take you into the kitchen?
Yeah.
What did you cook?
No.
Not yesterday.
No. Okay.
When was it? Can you show me in your book on your week? Which day was it? The day. I want to know if it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay.
Yeah. Wednesday.
That one?
Yeah.
Tuesday. Let's see if you can see it in the camera. Yeah, okay. Can you show it again so you can see? Tuesday. Was it morning or afternoon?
Morning.
Yeah, morning. Can we go?
Yeah.
All right.
Listen to the difference.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What did you say?
Good morning.
Okay. Now, global aphasia, that refers to an aphasic disturbance where everything is impaired. They're non-fluent, they don't understand, they don't repeat, and can't name. And the lesion there is in the frontal, temporal, and parietal lobes, includes Broca's area and Wernicke's area. I'm going to show you a video. Hopefully it will work.
Canus. You had a stroke? How long?
And all he can say is kinkinnis.
Yeah, I know that you're not from what you're saying now, but from the chart I know that the stroke happened in December.
Yes. Canus.
And you'd like to find you to point to the cup.
Can you hear that?
Which one is the cup? Is it this one or this one?
Picus.
You don't have to say anything. Just use your finger and point to the cup.
Picus.
Okay. Now, we've got two more to talk about, the transcortical aphasias. That's a group of aphasias that repetition is good. It spares repetition. And the reason for that is the language areas are, this is the Sylvian fissure here. And we call this sort of the peri-Sylvian language region. And here is the Broca's area, and lesions in around here produce Broca's aphasia. Lesions in around here produce Wernicke's aphasia. To repeat, the information's got to come in here, in Wernicke's area, and go forward to Broca's area. And then the person can repeat. Lesions that produce many of the aphasias knock out this connection between Broca's and Wernicke's area. The transcortical aphasias don't. So their lesions are outside this perisylvian speech region. So if you have a lesion in the back of the brain, posteriorly, parieto-occipital, but not affecting Wernicke's area, you're going to be able to repeat and you'll be fluent. If you have a lesion in the frontal lobe, you're going to be able to repeat, but you're not going to be fluent. And if you've got a lesion in both areas, you're not going to be able to repeat. You're not going to be able to put much of any kind of output, and pretty well all you'll be able to do is repeat. Okay? So the transcortical aphasias, there are 3 of them. The transcortical sensory is a posterior lesion in the temporoparietal occipital, in and around here. They have fluent speech, poor comprehension, poor naming, and good repetition. The transcortical motors have a lesion in the frontal region, sparing Broca's area. They have non-fluent speech, good comprehension, poor naming, and good repetition. And the mixed have a lesion in both areas, here and here. And they're non-fluent, they don't understand, they don't name, they can repeat. You say, how are you? They'll say, how are you? But they won't understand. So they'll repeat what you say. The last aphasia, we're running a little late because we had this talk really does finish at 11, but we had some difficulties. The anomic aphasia, that's aphasia where the only thing that's wrong is the person cannot name. Okay? They're fluent, they can repeat, but they cannot name. And the lesion is in the temporal or temporal-parietal area. Here's the video of that.
I have this old...
Tell me everything you see going on there.
Okay. Okay, we'll start off with this. This little girl, okay, she's going up to his brother, up to the cookie, but the what is it? The I can't tell you what it is. I know what it is. Chair is falling down, okay? Then the mother is going outside, is looking outside, and she has I can't tell you. I know what it is. Drinking. It's coming off. It's coming. Water is coming outside. Okay? Mm-hmm. And that's it.
So the person's got trouble naming. Okay? And the last slide here, there's a classification of aphasia. It looks at fluency, comprehension, repetition, and naming, and it gives you the profile in the different kinds of aphasias that I talked about. So you can use that at the bedside to help you. So I'm done, but that one video, I know you're into your break. Do you want to see the video of the lady who put the L on the forehead? It's a great video. Has there been any changes in your behavior?
You know what, I really don't think so.
I'm going to ask your daughter, have you noticed any changes?
I would say definitely.
Can you give me some examples?
A specific example, she had a dinner party and had, a bunch of people over, invited everyone over, sat down, served everyone their food, raced through her own meal, and, everyone's sitting there prepared for, a night of 2 or 3 hours of, eating and, drinking and conversing, and all of a sudden she's gone through a meal and she's picking up everyone's plates, and no one had finished their meal. No one had even, really started their meal. She had decided the night was over and it was time for them to go home. Then at school, some really, really strange behavior at her school was, I got a call from one of the teachers, and apparently she had written on a kid's forehead with a magic marker, and she had written a big L on the kid's forehead for loser.
Tell me exactly what happened with the letter L.
Well, as I say, he's a good kid, and he was just being a little bit silly, and so I put the L on his forehead.
But why did you go up to that particular student?
Because he was just being silly.
What do you mean?
He was just sort of standing up and doing a little dance and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And then what did you do?
That's when I went over and put it on.
Okay. And she obviously was removed from teaching very quickly. Are there any questions? There's a light going on there. Does that mean there's a question from Mississauga? What do I do? Here?
Yeah.
Where?
You're good. You're good. Hi. Sorry, guys. I know everyone wants to get to the next lecture, but I just had a question about the Wernicke's aphasia. You showed the video of the man who could follow the commands to stand up and turn around and do all the midline commands. I'm just curious, you said that has poor comprehension, and I just wanted to clarify because it seemed like he was able to understand and follow the midline directions.
Right.
So he has normal comprehension of midline directions, but can't understand to point.
Right. You've got it. What happens, it's a curious phenomenon. So when you ask a person with Wernicke's aphasia, classical Wernicke's aphasia, comprehension things, where you'll say, I want you to point to the door. Let's say they can do pointing. They won't be able to do that. Point to the ceiling. Won't be able to do that. Point to the floor. They won't be able to do that. So they're having great difficulty with comprehension. But when that comprehension involves the midline, glasses, mouth, open your mouth, close your mouth, open your eyes, close your eyes, stand up, turn around, bend forward, they can comprehend that. So the comprehension pathways in the brain seem to be different when it's comprehension for something involving the midline of the body. So they understand certain things, but not others.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'm not sure which button I pushed for that. Okay.
Hi, I have a question about the video you showed us for conduction aphasia.
Yep.
And so comprehension is intact, but do they comprehend that they are not repeating properly? Because I noticed that she wasn't trying to correct herself when she didn't repeat properly. Are they comprehending that?
Yes. I mean, when I started off, that's why I said she was a little atypical, because she wasn't monitoring herself. So she was speaking at quite a fast rate. These patients classically understand that they have difficulties, so their speech will slow down as they're trying to find the words and as they're trying to repeat. She has less insight into her speech problems than most people with conduction aphasia. So you're quite right about that. Any other questions? Questions from here? Okay, then we're done. Thank you.